So in 1989, I traveled to Central Africa to become a Peace Corps volunteer. And there are three things you need to know why people go into the Peace Corps: to read a book, to write a book, or to decide what they want to do with their life. For me, it was the latter. And so I ended up in Mikambo, in the northeast corner of Gabon, surrounded by hundreds of miles of tropical rainforest. And each night, I'd go to bed inside my mosquito net and listen to the rain in the canopy of the forest. And that's when I decided that what I really wanted to do was I wanted to find a way to help protect those forests and the other forests around the world. And so I came back, I studied environmental science, I studied law, and I eventually made my way to the US Department of State. And there I learned that the single biggest driver of global deforestation is agriculture. So that's why I went to work on global food policy, because if we can keep people fed, there's no need to cut down those forests. But I also learned that agriculture in many ways was getting better all the time, and people just didn't know it. Between 1980 and today, we've reduced the amount of water needed to produce our crops by 50% in America. We use 40% less land to do it. Things are getting better. And yet when I talk to people about how safe our food has become, people are even more worried about their food than they've ever been. And so this confused me. And so I started looking into behavioral economics and cognitive psychology and perception of risk to try to understand why are people worried more about food when our food has never been safer. And I began to realize it's because of how we perceive risk. It's how our brain is making decisions. So if you leave here knowing one thing, it's that you should not trust your brain. It is lying to you all the time, and I'm going to prove it. So I'm going to ask you guys a math problem. It's called the bat and the ball problem. Any fifth grader can get it right. Only 80% of you will get it wrong. Don't worry, the smarter you are, the more likely you are to get it wrong. So I need you to shout out the answer when you get it. Okay, here we go. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Answer? I heard some 5 cents, I heard some 10 cents. So now we're going to do the math. So if the ball costs 10 cents and the bat cost $1 more, that's $1.10 together, that's $1.20. That's not our answer. At 5 cents plus $1.05, that's $1.10. Now we can all do the math. But even for most of us, our first thought was 10 cents, even perhaps for those who said 5. And then we stopped and we figured it out. But if we hadn't stopped to do the math, many of us would have left here thinking, well, that was an easy math problem, and we would have been wrong. And we go through our day, every day, making important decisions about the food we eat and how it should be produced, and we're just as wrong because we don't stop to do the math. And so I want to talk to you about some of the ways that our brain comes to conclusions. It uses mental shortcuts to make decisions in the absence of detailed information. Really important that we do this. We don't have time to do the math all the time. But unfortunately, also sometimes leads us astray. And so I want to talk about some of these mental shortcuts. The first is something called confirmation bias. We look for information that's consistent with our beliefs, and we tend to avoid or discount information that's inconsistent with what we believe. And that has consequences. Now, how many people in the room feel like you're pretty open-minded? I suspect a lot of the people in this audience. So now think about it. When was the last time you changed your mind about something that was really important and critical to your personal identity? Was it last week? Was it last month? Can you even remember a time when you've changed your mind about something actually really important? Well, how can we be open-minded if we never change our minds? So we need to be open to changing our minds and actively looking for information that will help us to change our minds and make better decisions. Another type of shortcut is something called the availability heuristic. And for our purposes, it's just what information comes to mind when I say a word, like natural. Now, are you guys thinking butterflies and rainbows and puppies, or salmonella, Ebola, and Zika? Well, they're all natural too. You know, pretty much most of the bad things in the world, they're natural. But we all think happy thoughts, right? We all go straight to that good place. And that's because we're biased in favor of natural things. and we have a tendency not to support man-made things. And so as a result, we underestimate the risk of natural things, and we overestimate the risk of man-made things. We worry about pesticides, food additives, preservatives in our food, which are only there to make our food safer. Now, how many people worry about chemicals in their food? You try to avoid chemicals in your food. Got some bad news for you. Food is made of chemicals. You are made of chemicals. So we need to know what chemical we're talking about in order to know the risk of that chemical to decide whether or not we should eat it or not. So it's not enough information to make a good decision. I used to spend a lot of time talking about hazard and risk. Now, hazard, for those who don't know, is kind of answers the question, can something cause harm? And risk answers the question, does it cause harm? For regulators, they just need to know about the risk. And so think about that. A shark in the water is a hazard, but if you're standing on shore, it's not much of a risk. It only becomes a risk when the exposure, swimming in the water, is high enough. And so there are lots of things we worry about. We worry about terrorist attacks and plane crashes, and then there are things we should worry about, which are heart disease and all of that. But we worry about the things we hear about, we see on TV, we read on the internet. We don't worry about the things we don't know about. So instead of thinking of hazard and risk, I now talk about hazard times media exposure equals perception of risk. We worry about what people tell us to worry about, and we don't worry about things we don't know about. How could it be any different? But there are some risks to this. You may have heard of the dirty dozen. It's those fruits and vegetables with the highest number of pesticide residues on them. And that sounds scary, right? I mean, pesticide residues on our food. But there are two things to keep in mind. One is all food has pesticide residues, organic, conventional, GMOs, they all have it. And two, it only matters if the amount of residues are enough to make us sick. And when you look at all of these fruits and vegetables, the amount of pesticide residue is hundreds, if not thousands of times below a level that you would need to worry about. But the big worry for lists like this for me is that it discourages people from eating healthy fruits and vegetables. And it makes people more concerned about the fruits and vegetables that even aren't on this list because they may hear that they have pesticide residues as well. And so these mental shortcuts can cause us to make bad personal decisions. But they can also make us make bad policy decisions. Now, you're probably aware that 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese today, and that's a tremendous public health threat. And you may have even heard that they've recommended soda taxes as a way of reducing consumption. The problem with that, though, is that in the last 30 years, we've got growing obesity in America, and within the last 30 years, we are at the lowest rate of soda consumption in America. We're at the lowest rate in 30 years. So we're going to spend time, energy, and resources advocating a policy that is moving in exactly the opposite direction as obesity. And it doesn't mean that sodas don't play a part in obesity, but it's not the problem. And whenever we spend time, energy, and resources working on something that's not the problem, we're not spending it trying to find a real solution. And so again, we need to understand the causes behind that in order to make good decisions. So I want to bring us back to the forest. Because as I said, agriculture is the main driver of deforestation. In the next 30 to 40 years, we will need to produce as much food as was produced in the last 10,000 years of human civilization. Let me repeat that. We will need to produce as much food in the next 30 to 40 years as was produced in the last 10,000 years of human history. That is a challenge. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we use science and technology and innovation. And that requires the best of organic production, genetic engineering, gene editing, reduced food waste, cellular agriculture, plant-based proteins, livestock genetics. We need to do everything because the problem is that big. And so I want you to think about this. You need to fear less. You need to read more and please ignore the hype. So now, before we end, I want to take you in this room to the forest of Gabon so that you can be inspired in the way that I was. And to do this, we're going to be rubbing our hands together, we're going to be snapping our fingers, and we're going to be slapping our thighs, and we're going to start over here, and as we go across, join me. So, starting over here. Thank you very much.